Well, welcome to the Phil Cooke podcast. On this episode, we're going to talk about something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. And actually, it answers probably the biggest question I get from professional communicators, particularly that work for a church or a nonprofit or even a business. If you're working in an organization as a communication director, a media professional, producer, video person, designer, whatever, and you're frustrated because the leadership of that organization doesn't have a vision for media, we're going to talk about some answers today. How do you get your pastor excited about media? How do you get your nonprofit leader, even your CEO, excited about media? Because if they can't get excited about media, you're never going to achieve your potential. They're never going to allow you to do the things you're capable of doing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. All right. As I said in the opening, this is a big deal for me because I get so many questions, particularly when it comes to church and ministry media. It's the single biggest question I get by far. Phil, my pastor just doesn't have a vision for media. He's a great guy. He's a great pastor, but he doesn't see what's possible. And so I'm always being thwarted. I can't really do the things I'm called to do. Or he doesn't understand that we need to buy better equipment, or doesn't understand that I need a bigger team. You know, pastors and leaders, CEOs even, are often trained in the business they're in, whether it's, theology, education, whatever. They're not trained in how to use media and how to communicate that very, very well. So we're going to talk about you as a media professional. If you're one of those guys inside a church or a ministry organization, how in the world do you win him over? How do you convince him to respect you and your gifts and talents and what you're capable of, and supply you with the tools and the team to make it happen? We're going to talk about, 6 or 8 things today. I'm going to give you some ideas that I think are really important. Then I'm going to start off with a few that I made a lot of notes here, and you're going to see me looking down because I think this is so important. I really wanted to get it down well. And we're going to start with a few that you probably think you've heard before. Leadership tips, things like that you've heard before, but I think they're important to go back and start, and then we're going to work our way up to some things that will really, really impact this question in a bigger way. Number one, if the pastor doesn't respect you, or he doesn't have a vision for media, or you don't really, he's not really seeing what you're capable of, I start with taking ownership of your work and taking ownership of your attitude. In other words, you need to have skin in the game. Very often we act like, well, if the pastor doesn't want to do it, if he doesn't want to see it, then why should I waste my time? You need to be an example to him of what's possible. And that means having skin in the game and taking ownership of the project you're involved in. I remember early in my career, one of the first international projects I ever did was to go up the Amazon River. I was asked to take a film crew up the Amazon River and shoot a medical outreach that was way, way, way deep into the Amazon jungle. And we flew into Manaus, major city, about halfway up the Amazon. Then we took a light plane for 4 hours with our gear and our equipment. I literally was sitting on an oil drum of gasoline for the plane to use on the return trip, because there was nothing at the end of our trip but a dirt runway. And we flew 4 hours into the jungle and landed. Then we shifted to a freighter, this big old chugging diesel freighter, and we went 2 days upriver on this freighter. Then we switched to canoes. We had canoes for our gear and the team, us, the medical doctors that were with us, and we went another 4 or 5 hours, maybe it was a full day, all the way up to the headwaters of the Amazon. This was the little tributaries that feed the mighty Amazon River. And we were so far away, if a nuclear bomb had gone off anywhere in the world, we'd have never known. And this is back before cell phones, before the internet. I was isolated. I think I was gone for a month from my wife. And so it was a really interesting trip. The problem was I didn't have skin in the game. They brought me on to film what they were doing, and it was their outreach and their mission. It was an interesting remote tribe that we were dealing with there, and I didn't have any skin in the game, so I complained about everything. I just complained about everything. I was a whiner the whole time, and as I said, it was in my early 20s, one of my first international jobs, and I whined so much that later on, months or years later, I looked back on that and I was so embarrassed that I called my friend Barry Dennison, who was leading that medical missions team, and I apologized to him. And it taught me a really valuable lesson that when you don't have skin in the game, you tend to be much more of a complainer. You criticize everything, and this is true because people on your team, on your crew. They may be volunteers, they may be interns, they may be inexperienced, people, paid employees. And when they don't have that kind of skin in the game, they complain all the time and you hate it. So when it comes to you and the projects you're doing for your church, your ministry, your business, have skin in the game. Feel like you have ownership. Even if you don't own things, act like it. Take that attitude of ownership because it's really, really important. And it really inspires excellence. And the key thing here is you may not have the official title, but you can act like you do. And by that, I mean, don't alienate people. Don't be a jerk. Don't make people angry. Don't step on toes, but just take charge. Quietly, subtly, you step up as if you had that title, whether you have it or not. The second thing is to help win them over is build strong relationships with your team. The people that you're working with on a day-to-day basis, they may be in your department, they may be outside your department. I learned early on in my career that it wasn't just the people in my department I wanted to have a relationship with. It was the CEO's secretary. It was the people in other departments that I needed from time to time that I wanted a relationship with. And I knew that CEO secretary, she could get me meetings. She could arrange things. She could do things that other people couldn't do, and certainly I couldn't do. Build those kind of relationships. Again, early in my career, I worked with an organization in the Midwest that I wasn't the boss. I was the creative guy, so they didn't trust me to be the boss. But the guy they would bring in, they kept bringing in a parade of people to be the boss that had no media experience whatsoever. And because I was building strong relationships with a team, whenever decisions were made by one of these guys, they would just look to me and say, well, what do you think, Phil? What should we do? And I realized I didn't have the title, but everybody looked at me like I did. Everybody looked at me for advice, and they looked at me for leadership. And it only happened because I took the time to build relationships, to get to know them, get to know their families, get to know their kids. Develop those kind of relationships will be invaluable. A third thing I think that's important is become proactive and solution-oriented. Now, obviously, you've heard that before, and that's a common leadership thing. But I think it's really, really important because becoming solution-oriented is going to put you to the top of the line. It's going to accelerate your career big time. I tell my team at Cooke Media Group, look, I want you to come to me with problems. When you see problems on a shoot, we just finished a big, giant commercial shoot just a few weeks ago. And when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line, you're talking about a big crew. Obviously, if you see something go south, I want to know about it right away. But I also tell them, don't come to me with a problem unless you have a proposed solution. Now, your solution may not be the best, and we may not take it. It may not work, but at least I want you thinking about how to solve the problems you're encountering. This is really critically important. So become solution-oriented and seek out, be proactive in all this. Find problems, look for problems, but don't just complain about problems. Bring solutions to the table. I just think that you should be an idea generator, not just a problem pointer-outer. That's an important thing. Write that down. Be an idea generator, not just a problem pointer-outer. Come with solutions to the table. And don't be offended if the pastor, if the ministry leader, if the boss doesn't take your suggestions, but at least you've come with solutions, and they will get to know, look, when Bob, when Susan, when they come to me and point out problems, I know they'll have a solution. So their door will be open to you every time. I think that's going to be an important, critical thing. Okay, number 4, lead by example. And again, it's a leadership principle we all know, but as we start to win over our bosses, win over pastors and ministry leaders to what we're capable of and what can be done with media and communication, the first thing to do in my book is lead by example. When you're not in charge, when you're leading from the middle, you've heard that term before, when you're leading from the middle, the best way to do that is become an example for other people around you. Let them know they can trust you. Let them know you have answers. Let them know you've done your homework. And that happens just by being an example. And the old saying that's so true is your actions speak louder than words. Actions speak so much louder than words. I don't care if you're a brilliant genius. If you're not doing it every day, if you're not acting it out every day, nobody's going to pay attention, and it doesn't really matter. And the truth is, it's not about the actions we take as much as the influence we have on others. That's important to remember. Influence we have on others is so important. So I think that, it's critically important that we understand that leading by example really, really does matter. So leading by example, number 4, that's a really critical thing. Now, let's go to 5, because I think we're going to get into some serious stuff, and this is really important in this conversation. Number 5 is get past the budget battle. This is especially true with churches, nonprofits, ministry organizations. Look, you're not working for a Hollywood studio. You're not working for a major corporation. You have budget limitations. Deal with it. Get over it. Stop whining and complaining about it. I know guys that work at a church. I know one guy is a church media director. Every time I see him, all he wants to do is complain about what the church won't let him buy, the equipment they won't let him have, the limitations to his budget. Hey, that's part of life. I spend an enormous time teaching media professionals around the world, and I'll go to India or China or South America, and I'll see people working with tools that we would think would be so substandard, and they're doing amazing things. It's not the tools you work with, it's the ingenuity you bring to the table, it's the creativity you bring to the table. That's what's really important. So get past the budget battle. Here's the thing, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have better gear. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have a bigger budget. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have a bigger team. But believe me, from the perspective of a boss, whining about it, constantly complaining about it, constantly even bringing it up, that doesn't help. That doesn't endear you to the boss and make him want to really come alongside and help you. Get past the budget battle. And on that subject, by the way, I wrote a blog post not long ago on the fact that if you're a media producer, you're also a fundraiser. What if you went out and raised the money? Well, this is a crazy idea. What if you, instead of sitting there complaining that you don't have the budget you need, what if you went out and raised that budget? Here in Hollywood, let me tell you, when people become producers, they also become fundraisers. Producers, probably the majority of their work is taken up with finding investors, pitching to studios, finding donors, whatever the project is. They're out there hustling. They're beating the bushes, coming up with money for their project. In fact, there are certainly staff producers that work full-time at studios and networks, but they're doing small stuff. They're doing trailers. They're doing behind-the-scenes videos. They're not making the movies. They're not producing the major TV programs. Those guys are constantly out hustling for money. So you may be a producer at a church or communications director at a church or ministry or nonprofit. Maybe you go out and raise the money. What if you found a donor, found a rich person in your community who you could name your edit suite after him or her? You could name the studio after him or her. Either way, it doesn't matter. It's so important that you go out and find that kind of person. I mean, trust me. The minute you bring some serious money to the table from an outside donor, investor, church member, whatever, let me tell you, you will get the pastor's attention. You will get the executive director of the ministry's attention or the nonprofit's attention. You will get their attention fast. Again, you move up to the front of the line. So I think that's a really critical issue. I think that if you can bring money to the table, get past the budget battle, I think that's really, really important. So that's a really critical step. Now, number 6, now we're going to get into some really serious, interesting things. Number 6, become a great communicator. Become a great communicator. We often don't realize that leadership is closely tied to effective communication. Now, that simply means that if you're a media director, a communication director, creative person in any way, you need to be able to communicate your vision. The budget battle area is a great example. If you can't communicate that well, maybe the problem you're not getting the budget you need is you're not communicating it well. And one of the secrets here, and let me just say this, one of the secrets is think about their point of view, not yours. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But communicating that well is absolutely critical. Learn to share your thoughts, your ideas, and your concerns. Don't be the boring person in the meeting that drones on and on about your problems. Learn to communicate effectively. And there's so many books out there. There's a great book by Roger Ailes called You Are the Message. That's just a fantastic resource for that. Become a better communicator, and it will change the way you think about these things, because it's your job as a leader to communicate the vision effectively. Then the last couple things I think are really, really important are, number 7, you need to many of you, not everybody, but many of you probably need to start changing your perception from being a techie person to a media producer or a creative director or a media director, communications director. Many of you watching this or listening to this, I know, grew up in a church where you were a volunteer. You started out running camera, pulling cables, maybe as an assistant audio person, and you worked your way up, and you've mostly been technically oriented. I know a lot of guys like that who are now leading church media organizations or leading the department, and they're really at heart tech guys. They love it. They grew up in that. Here's the problem, and this is not to denigrate or criticize anybody, but the pastor probably looks at you as the tech guy, not the idea guy. He's not looking at you as the leader. He's looking at you as the guy that fixes the video camera or fixes the iMac screens. And you need to change that perception. And it's your job, not his. It's your job to change that perception. And I think that's really, really important. I spoke at a conference recently that was a conference for church media directors, but I learned pretty quickly they were mostly tech heads. They were mostly tech guys. And they were great at it. They were really good. And these were very large churches, but they were mostly really tech guys. And I went up and I did one of my workshops on my book, Ideas on a Deadline, How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking. And as I was talking about ideas and how to create ideas, particularly when the pressure was on, man, phew, it went right over their head. They couldn't wait for the workshop to end so they could go back to the exhibit hall and talk to the Sony rep about the refresh rates on their iMac screens. That was all they were thinking about. And the idea, generating ideas, being a producer, those kind of concerns didn't bother them at all. So here's the thing. You can find a lot of tech guys out there, and it's, again, not being critical, not being dismissive, but it's pretty easy to find technical help, technical expertise out there. It's a lot harder to find people who understand the culture today, understand the strategies we need to be thinking about, what platforms to use, how to engage today's culture with the gospel. Those people are a lot harder to come by. And the minute you start moving in that direction, I think you start to get the pastor's attention. You start to get the boss's attention, the CEO's attention, the ministry leader's attention. That's really, really important. I think that may be one of the biggest issues many of you face. I just see so often it happening that it's all about perception. And how do you change it? It really starts with you, which leads me to number 8, which is start thinking from the pastor's point of view. So often, I'll be in meetings with media people or communications people, and they're with a pastor, and it's a pastor meeting and, discussing where we're going and what's happening. And they spend the whole time talking about audio levels, lumens, light levels on the stage, camera angles. Pastor is zoned out. Pastor doesn't care about that stuff. I mean, sometimes he'll be concerned about how he looks and the angle you're trying to get and the people and things and showing empty seats and stuff like that, which you should never do. But mostly the pastor's concerned about how do I use these tools to grow the church? How do we use these tools to reach the biggest number of people with the gospel? How do we use these tools to change people's lives? Start thinking from his point of view instead of your point of view, which also means start speaking his language, not your language. He doesn't care about all the tech talk. He doesn't care about model numbers for cameras. He doesn't care about what computer you're using to do your editing on. He doesn't care about any of that stuff. He cares about how to reach the lost. So here's then how to grow the church. So the more you get into that mode of thinking, the quicker he'll start paying attention to you and start responding to you. I just can't say that enough. We just need to think more like the pastor. I think I'll just be brutally honest here and say probably one of the biggest reasons I get hired, our team at Cooke Media Group gets hired by pastors and ministry leaders is they want somebody they can talk to from their perspective. They're tired of talking to their media team. In fact, I had one pastor who called me and we had breakfast one morning and he said, I don't even like being around my media guys. I don't want to be in the same room with them. He said, they don't speak my language. They're not concerned about what I'm concerned about. I walk in and I have to stand around and wait for half an hour while they set their lights and set the cameras. I mean, I walk in that room ready to go. I'm prayed up. I've studied up. I'm ready to go in that studio and tape. And yet I have to suddenly fizzle, come down while they're standing around fixing things and setting things up. Drives me crazy. He said, how do I solve this? It took me almost 2 years working with that church to get them on the same page because I had to completely retrain that crew to start thinking the way the pastor thinks. So I think this is so very, very important. The sooner you start thinking from the pastor, the leader's point of view, the better. He really just doesn't care. So I can just testify. I've made a career off that because I'm the guy, like I say, I'm the guy that the pastor will call because he can't talk about the things he's concerned about to his team. He wants to talk about how do I use video or television or short videos or whatever to reach a bigger audience? How do I use my books? How do I use social media? That's not what my team is talking about. All they want to talk about is they need a better camera, or they need more cameras, or they need to do this, or they need to do that. So look, I'm just saying, get on the pastor's wavelength sooner, and it will completely change his attitude toward you, and that vision will completely change. So I know that, and I don't want to make this sound easy. It's not. And I know there's some pastors, there's some leaders that probably won't change. It could be a case where they're of a generation where they're never going to really learn how to do this. But I think more and more and more, we're seeing that generation retire from ministry and an earlier generation come in. And while maybe they weren't trained in how to use communication and media effectively, they at least get it. They've got their phone, their mobile devices. They get computers. They understand social media. They just want to know how my team can come around me and support me in making that happen. And he wants to be able to speak to you in the language he or she understands. It may be theology. It may be business. Whatever that language is, get on that wavelength. Stop talking tech and get on that wavelength and start talking to them. So it's, like I say, it's not necessarily easy. It may take a little bit. But I'll tell you, if you could implement these 8 principles, if you can implement these 8 keys, the sooner the better, I really believe you'll start seeing a noticeable change in how the leader of your organization responds to you moving forward. And really, that's what it's all about. I just have a real passion for media directors and church communicators, how we can really use the gifts God's given us. And I think that your calling, I've said this before, your calling as a communicator, as a media professional is just as important, just as significant as the senior pastor, the executive pastor, the worship leader, anybody else on your team. The question is, how do you get in that inner circle? How do you get around that table where your calling can really be expressed, where your ideas can come out that will help the whole church and the whole team go to the next level? Go back, review this. This is so important. Play it again. If you can start implementing these, make notes, remind yourself, put it in your diary, put it in your planner, because if you can start changing these things, I think you'll see a dramatic difference. And let me close by just saying my book, Maximize Your Influence, was written for that pastor, that nonprofit leader. This is the book for them, not necessarily for you. It may help you, it may benefit you, but I really wrote this to help them understand what you do, help them understand what video is all about, them understand what teaching a digital generation is about, helping them understand what social media is about. You get this book for them as a gift, and that'll start that conversation, and it'll open up doors that'll help them start speaking, the same, help you and the pastor start speaking the same language, and it will dramatically change your future. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you being a part of this community. Go to my blog at philcooke.com, and I'd love to talk to you there. Feel free to reach out. You can email me there if you have questions, or I'd love to know more topics you'd like to see that will help you in your career, because I think where we're going is going to be amazing.